I'm trusting you guys can see this. Um, so th Thank you, Tina, for that kind intro. Let's just jump right into this. I had hoped to do, was thinking about doing this as we were waiting for everyone to arrive, but let's get a sense where everyone is today. We also need to test this, make sure it works, as this is fairly new to me, and I have other questions for you later in the talk. But it's easiest if you just use your phone and log in at, just go to slido.com or use the QR code here. Scan it, enter in the number if it's prompted, and enter in where you're from. And I see, not surprised, see Vancouver. This is where I'm really gonna. So I'm in Bozeman, Montana, which is just south of Alberta, about Lethbridge, Alberta, if any of you guys know. Looks like you've got there are, this is also where I'm realizing I should have boned up on my Canada geography. Glad to see red deer here, Alberta. This is great. Um, that's in the Maritimes. Anybody from the territories? Wow, it's a nice mix. Really impressive. All right. Yeah, I thought I saw somebody registered from South Africa on this on the registration list, but there we go. All right. Well, thank you for that. It looks like the system works. And so as Tina mentioned, I run environmental health sciences, which exists to drive good science into public policy and public discussion around our environment and health. And I'm a journalist. My background is journalism. We publish two news sites. That's EHN, or Environmental Health News, and the Daily Climate. And then there's one focused on science called HEEDS. And we have a page dedicated to Spanish language news. And of course, we have our main website, which is ehsciences.org, and probably gets the least traffic of any of this. And then we also publish a dozen daily and weekly newsletters that curate top news on various environmental topics. I encourage you to check us out and to subscribe. And of course, we're on social media. But I'd like to start quickly with how I got here and kind of what drives me and what I do. I fell into environmental journalism a little bit by accident as a reporter at the Oakland Tribune in California. In the early 2000s, I saw a report on flame retardants in breast milk, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that the most nourishing substance a mother could give to her child has these synthetic, potentially toxic chemicals in it, right? And so I want to note at the very beginning of this talk that this information did not come to me as a reporter via a university researcher or a journal article, even though plenty of such research was available at the time. It came via scientists at an advocacy organization, Environmental Working Group, and at the California Department of Toxic Substances Control, so an agency. And the information, and with help from those two organizations or entities, I did something a little crazy. We found a family in Berkeley and tested their blood for a suite of chemical contaminants, and the results were shocking. So this is a little picture of two members of that family that we tested back in the early 2000s. This little guy, Rowan, had occupational level exposure to PBDEs, those flame retardants that initially drove me into this work. And so nobody believed me as a journalist. Nobody believed these results, in part because they kept telling me that, these results aren't peer reviewed. And so I wrote up these results. The second crazy thing I did, I think, is I wrote these results for Environmental Health Perspectives, a peer-reviewed journal that I'm sure most of you guys know about. And because we were really careful on study design, we had got an IRB approval, and we got it published as a case study in EHP. And I'm really proud of this. It's been cited almost 200 times since we published in 2006. It's still relevant. was published, it was cited 5 times by other researchers and papers in the past year. Um, and it's part of how I feel like this is something that we kind of helped both with journalism and with science. Um, and so fast forward, today I run environmental health sciences. We work with scientists, as Tina mentioned, to help contextualize research. We work with companies on sustainable solutions. We have a newsroom and we publish our own journalism and newsletters, and this is our main website, ehn.org. And to set the stage, I want to let you know what drives my work and the work at EHS. There's some kind of core beliefs that really have shaped my work and my view. And first and foremost is that high quality science has to be the foundation of public policy. And that with that, those whose health is affected by policy have to have a seat at the table. They have to be the driving voices in the creation of those policies. And then this third bullet here is really the one I come to back to the most, that progress is never a result of scientific discovery alone. You need other forces, crusading journalism, effective advocacy, and an educated public. You need public pressure. Nothing happens just by itself, really. And one thing I often hear is that we have enough science to make decisions, that we don't need another study showing X. And that may be true. But what that view misses is the power of the steady drip, 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 drip of news. Journalists and readers need news hooks, and that new science provides that. Even if we know PFAS really shouldn't be in food packaging, it keeps this issue in front. And I think that drip, drip, drip produces change. And I want to stop and underscore this right now because this is important. There's a sense of urgency here, right? We all do work day in and day out that feels like we're making no progress, maybe. And that is a fundamentally unfair and inaccurate feeling. Big change doesn't happen without little bits of progress, without lots of people pushing. And we had 2 big changes just this week in the US. And so I'm really grateful to be able to chance to talk to you about these because this is some really important news here that happened this week in the United States. The US Environmental Protection Agency imposed new limits on pollution affecting fence line communities and required water utilities to get PFAS, those forever chemicals, out of drinking water. This is some of the biggest news on my beat or our beat in months. And I hold that all of us here today had a role in that. And I would further argue that it's important to acknowledge this and to capitalize on these and to celebrate this, right? I've given my team, for instance, tomorrow afternoon off, right? And if you're in charge of staff, I would encourage you to also take time to celebrate even seemingly remote victories like this. They are too rare in our line of work, and the issues are just too urgent. So we are here to talk about the good, the bad, and the future of environmental journalism. And so here's where, let me start maybe with the bad, and just put it out there in the room. And so I'm encouraging you to go back to Slido.com if you haven't already. If you have it still on your browser, it should flip up to this question. There we go. Have you ever had a bad experience with a reporter? And let's see. I almost put on here like, well, I haven't talked to a reporter, right? So if you haven't talked to a reporter, well, that's fair enough. But I am curious to see about this. And I would say, I think if you are not sure if you've had a good or bad experience with a reporter, I'm going to call that a bad experience. And perhaps in our discussion during the Q&A afterwards, we can talk about how you minimize the odds of a bad experience happening and what to do when you find things going sideways. But I confess, I'm kind of glad to see that the actual yes column is just barely half. I mean, I was bracing for worse. Let's give it another beat or two here for any others. Looks like you guys are in. All right, so let's keep this number in mind let's come back to this in the Q&A, and we can talk a little bit about what happened and how to avoid that. But there is plenty of bad to dwell on if we wanted to. This is a Washington Post editorial cartoon from 2009 that sadly remains very relevant today. I don't need to spend a lot of time, and I don't particularly want to spend a lot of time on the negatives. I think you know the gist. Local journalism is getting hollowed out. The business model has been broken for almost 2 decades. We're still looking for a new one. We have fragmented society into a bunch of different media silos, media shards. But I want to make the case that out of this mess, we are seeing some good news, things that we never envisioned a decade ago, and things that really, frankly, are only possible because of all this chaos and turbulence. One of those is the rise of environmental justice reporting. And I think we can trace the start to this to any number of efforts. In the US, I think a lot of people look to the fight against dumping PCB-laden soil in a landfill in a predominantly Black community in North Carolina in the 1980s. Or you could point to epidemiologist Steve Wing, if any of you guys remember his work in the early 90s or 90s of finding that feedlots have a disproportionately harmful health impact on poor people of color. What we have seen recently is this rise in publications, and I'll put EHN in there with them, but a rise like Grist or The Intercept, where environmental journalism is a cornerstone of the coverage, right? This is a photo of our bilingual Texas reporting team that we just hired a couple years ago, Cami Farrell and Jimmy Evans, who are out in the communities around the Texas shipping channel down south in the Gulf Coast, raising awareness, lifting up voices. The Canadian government in February, I'm sure all of you guys here are aware, launched an engagement effort with Canadians on the right to a healthy environment and is developing a national strategy to advance environmental justice and fight or address environmental racism. And in the US, President Biden has made clear that big initiatives need an environmental justice component. And in fact, I think that EPA ruling on fence line communities is part of that focus and effort. Another thing, the decline of local journalism, in communities is precipitous and it's dangerous. If you don't have a local paper, I sit on the Bozeman City Commission, basically our town government. It's very different when there's not a reporter in the room versus when there is a reporter. So that I don't have an answer to that lack of kind of really local government. But we are seeing a rich and diverse ecosystem of nonprofit news, of niche news, of collaboration springing up. And one of the best examples is here in Canada, the Narwhal, based in Canada, obviously, but it does really good, really impactful community and environmental reporting. There's also Inside Climate News is another website that's really has a lot of local bureaus. ProPublica is a ridiculous, well-funded outfit that has won multiple Pulitzer Prizes working with local and regional newsrooms. So we partnered with a bilingual news magazine, Palabra, and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists to publish a piece about pollution in Texas that was then picked up by dozens of other outlets, both online and kind of community focused in the region. So again, the lack of local journalism is a problem, but we are seeing some outfits kind of stepping up and filling in these voids. And that collaboration, our collaboration in Texas with Palabra and AHJ shows another bright spot, I think, in the journalism landscape, is that we have the power and the tools to take reporting directly to the people. The reporters of this collaboration, Alejandra Martinez and Wendy Perez, have started WhatsApp and Facebook groups where they're sharing news as they generate it, as they get it, with parents many of whom are not, necessarily on email or reading news in a browser. This photo shows Daisy Canales with her son, and these two are both fighting inadequate air quality monitoring near that Texas shipping channel. There is a term for this. I'm sure many of you are aware. It's called language justice. And there's data, at least in the US, showing that fewer than 1 in 10 organizations working in environmental health publish their work in a language other than English. It's a particular problem for those fence line communities near power plants, near factories, near refineries, where there's often spillover pollution, that so often bear the brunt of our plastic and our fossil fueled life, right? And so by partnering Palabra, the Pulitzer Center, the Texas Tribune, we're able to bring this information to the community. And this brings up another plus, the astonishing blossoming of storytelling methods in our digital age. Here's a story we published on chemical recycling. Anyone reading a newspaper in the 1980s would feel 100% comfortable here. It's a long story, a 7-minute read, maybe about 2,000 words, told in paragraphs and complete sentences. It's kind of my default. But we can tell that same story in 60 words on Instagram. We tell it in 120 words in a tweet on X or Twitter. We tell it as an audio story or a podcast with our radio partners in the region. And we tell it in Spanish via a video on YouTube. And note that this video is less than 90 seconds long. So there's one final trend that is worth celebrating, and that's the increasing desire, or maybe the frustration, of scientists who want to see more impact with their work. Now, I hope for time this afternoon to talk about talk more, with this group, right? There's a lot of expertise in this group, and I really want to take advantage of all of you guys. But to talk about impact and how you measure it, how you achieve it, right? But what I'm seeing is that for many scientists, it's not enough just to publish in a scientific journal. And now, let me stop here for a minute, because I don't want to by any means discount the amount of work it takes to get research published in a scientific journal. My wife is at the university. She's a soil chemist. She just about bit off my head when I said scientists need to do more than just publish in scientific journals. It's a lot of work, and I want to acknowledge that. But I'm seeing, and maybe you guys are as well, kind of early career scientists, postdoc grad students, coming out of the university wanting more, essentially, and more connection, more impact, more engagement with their work. And this is Agents of Change is one of these programs. This is the screen grab of their website. It's a collaboration we're working on. It's the brainchild of Ami Zota at Columbia University. And we work with cohorts of scientists from underrepresented backgrounds who often aren't visible or heard in kind of traditional scientific settings. And we work with them to publish essays and podcasts about their work. And what we found is that there's an appetite for this attention and information, and that these scientists get noticed. They get invited to give talks. They get to edit special journals. They get to participate in other community efforts and an outreach. A couple have even gotten job offers. So it's a fun outlet, and it's very satisfying work just to help support this and give this a platform. So let's talk about why you guys are essential. And I need first to go back to one of my beliefs, that progress is never a result of scientific discovery alone. But science is essential. And Canada, I will say, I've looked at Canada for a long time, and you have some great examples of all of this coming together. So let's go back to 2008. I didn't ask about ages at the beginning of this, but I have no doubt that many of you were around when this astonishing transformation in the market took place. Canada was the first country to call BPA dangerous and to ban it from baby bottles and children's toys. And a lot of things came together to make this happen, much like the EPA decisions this week, right? You had a dogged and really good reporter in Martin Middlestead, one of my heroes. I hope I hope his byline remains familiar to several of you because he was a great reporter for the Globe and Mail. You had that steady drip, 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 drip of science on BPA. And you had parents that got activated and energized and then started asking, why is this stuff in their kids' products and baby bottles? We can argue that we made a grave mistake in just focusing on BPA as opposed to other chemical cousins like BPS or BPZ or just bisphenols in general. But almost overnight, you had manufacturers getting BPA out of their bottles and other products. And the US followed suit a year or two later. And there are ongoing opportunities to inject good science into public policy, right? The international talks on the plastic treaty are coming to Ottawa later this month. Ambition has been low, especially from the Japan, the US, I'd even put Canada in there. This is the time I would suggest to make sure that any discussion on plastic pollution contains a health component. It's not just about straws in the ocean or low recycling rates. So again, I want to have a discussion here in a minute about how you do this, how you have impact, how you inject yourself into something as big and as impenetrable as an international treaty negotiation, and whether that's really effective, for something as slow moving as UN talks. But there's one more point I think I want to make here. I trust that you all are familiar with the carnival game Whack-A-Mole, where you're forever pounding down the same little creatures. We're doing that with chemical policy. BPA is a good example that's 15 years old at this point, but we're still playing. The phthalate DEHP is just the latest example. Several bills legislatures, several bills are moving through U.S. legislatures to ban it in IV bags and intravenous tubing, and that's great. It'll make a dent. It's important. But my question is kind of what chemistry or what chemical will the industry scurry to next? Will it be any better or worse? Why not just work to say get PVC out of the market? And is this the best we can do? Can we take a more systematic approach? I mean, the California bill tries to avoid this trap of regrettable substitution. It prohibits manufacturers from swapping DEHP with any of 11 other orthophthalates that are fairly common in the market. So that's good news. I think the activist community and lawmakers are awake to this issue. But I do wonder why we can't take a more systemic approach to this. And perhaps I am being a little naive in that desire, right? Understanding of the forces that are at play and how change actually happens. But I could continue on for any number of directions, but I want to really open this up at this point to discussion and questions. Before doing that, I do have a question of my own for you guys. How do you measure impact? Keep this tight. 1 or 2 words, or 3 words. There will be time for paragraphs and sentences later. I'm just wondering though, if you see it as is it is it press coverage? Is it legislative change? Is it is it market change? Is it a healthier environment? Uh, clicks. I gotta say, being an online journalist, clicks are the bane of my life. But yeah, I'm just how do we? And this is where I'd really, frankly, want to just open this up to okay, where how do we if we're doing this work because we want a cleaner and healthier environment, how do you measure that? So I see here some audience involvement, some change in regulations seems to be winning the day here, and change in behaviors is all really powerful. Readers taking actions. I'm trusting hospitalizations would be a reduction in hospitalizations, but we'll just assume that. Attention, products changed. I appreciate this, guys. This is common use, new guidance. Media pickups, that's another, that's a common thing, right? So um, I don't see, it's interesting that I don't see kind of legislative action as a choice. I wonder if that, you know, can we roll that up into change in regulations? But systemic change would be good. Yes. So this is really helpful. So this, I wonder if we can leave this up, maybe Tina, and open this up to questions. I'm happy, you know, really, I did want to capture more of a discussion with everyone. Um, and just we'll open it up at this point to any sort of, you know, to questions. Uh, we can talk about impact. We can talk about other questions you have. I do want to come back to, you know, if any of you guys who had those, I would love to hear some of those experiences that you may have had with journalists where it went a little south, and we could talk about kind of maybe how you recovered and what happened there. Um, but I'm really open to any of your questions that you have at this point.